to our September webinar where we talk about automated user onboarding and offboarding with Entra ID Governance. For any questions, please type them in the chat box. We will try to get to all of them at the end of today's discussion. Without further ado, I'm passing it over to you, Conrad.
All right. Well, this has been a topic that I've been so excited when it came out and to talk to customers about, because this is a challenge we can all resonate with. There's probably very few organizations on the planet, probably super small, don't make any changes in the organization, probably not great, but that have this particular problem. So I'm really glad that you all took the time today for us to walk through it. So, I always like to start off with a summary so you kind of know some of the things we're going to go through today, and I am going to be demoing some of this live and including some other little fun extensions, and give a little bit of guidance both on some pricing, what things to consider, who, how, where, and just kind of open the door to this. I think when you go through if you spend any time on the Microsoft website looking at Entra ID, and I'll give a little bit overview of Entra as well, to see how all this plays in the mix. Really at the end of the day, what we want to do is really automate these repetitive tasks that we have. Bringing new people into the organization is exciting. They bring the resources that we need. They bring a newfound energy. We spend a lot of time recruiting them and finding them and getting them ready for the day. And oftentimes there is a lot of manual action that happens to it. So let's talk about what we can do to automate it. One thing I really want you to think about is, oftentimes people think, well, there's, manual actions is a cost. Every time these important groups have to email one another, get in sync with one another, managers make sure you have this, security team, it's all these extra actions that creates a strain when it's really this exciting moment. But it's just not bringing new people on. It's also when people are departing the organization because of retirement, or maybe they're changing in role. They've gone from the sales team into the marketing team. There's all these different people movement that happen in the organization, and normally there's IT tasks that go with it. But it's not just the IT team people themselves. Their managers have to participate. Sometimes you have security and a compliance team that have to participate. And I've seen this in many organizations. We used to do these things too. It's crazy. You'd have a spreadsheet and documents and a Word document. People have to follow, but you don't know if they follow that process. And managers are inundated to make sure that they get added to the right teams. And sometimes you still need to do that, but consistently, how do we do that? And it shouldn't be a brand new endeavor. And then look back. Did we do those things? Did those actions happen? And even more so when people leave the organization, it's not always just as easy as, just disable their account. They could still be littered across all of the other wonderful SaaS applications that we have, and we may not want to delete the user. Some organizations, especially if you're doing compliance things, you need to keep that user object there because it's mandated for whatever reason. Not going to argue with anybody around, well, sometimes you delete them, sometimes you don't. It's not for me to dictate, but it's for your organization to understand, what do we do? Maybe we do disable their account, have to create them. What about their mailbox? Does that need to shift? What about the other groups that they were in? Make sure they're removed. The other SaaS applications, all of these pieces that have to happen. In the end, what we're really trying to think about is the employee experience during their starting, during their change of roles. Could be a large change of roles that are happening. Is it happening on a consistent basis? And I'll tell you, I've spent time in the Marine Corps and in military. I love, standard operating procedures and kind of a love-hate relationship. But SOPing it doesn't always work. People skip steps. Sometimes it doesn't work in that. What did we do? And to look in the past for all that, it's challenging. So if you're here, most likely you kind of see these same challenges. And you probably have a process that looks like this. Just one common thing from a new hire process. Yours may look exactly like this, could look more complex than this. I'm not going to walk through this stuff, but it's a lot of emails, spreadsheets, Word doc. Maybe you've done some very cool things, with Power Automate and Power Apps, and try to recreate this whole experience yourself, but it's not always used. It doesn't handle exceptions, and a lot of things start at the HR system. And even there, once we do offboard somebody, maybe we do delete their items at some point. Maybe we do forward their emails until some point. We don't necessarily delete them from HR. We don't maybe not necessarily delete things. So when do we disable? When do we delete? And how do we handle the communication? So, this process a lot of times is built off of just overtime. People add to the things. We have meetings and meetings of what to go do. And every time a manager gets a new hire, they forget what it was a year ago and have to go through a whole process. So it doesn't mean that all that goes away. What it does mean is that we can simplify and get together on the same page. So for many of you have already seen that Microsoft has rebranded, Entra ID, which is Azure Active Directory, or formerly Azure Active Directory, I should say. But there's a lot of other pieces that go through with Entra in terms, both in governance, in how it communicates to certain services, and it's really at the center of all this. So the collection of Entra products, we're not going to go through all of these except for one, which is the Entra ID Governance. They're intended to coordinate and work with one another in terms of their specific area. You notice the Entra ID, External ID doesn't have an icon because Microsoft doesn't have an icon for it. So, but there also be in there, but there's a spot for it, literally. And so these products are intended to work together in the scenario that best fits your organization. Not everybody has a need for all the pieces, but as time's going, people are starting to get to it. And again, when we focus really on the governance side of this, we're really thinking about, areas that you go through a lot. People join an organization, they have an identity, they have another job, and they can retire, terminated, leave, whatever that might be. A lot of times we talk about employees, contractors could be in the same kind of area. And then, but once they are who they are and they adjust, we still have to give them access. What do they have access to? So this is where we start talking about, with access management and entitlement management, all of these pieces. How do we keep that up to date? Right now, it is still a very manual act. We see this in hundreds of customers every single day. And this is a great place where the Entra ID governance really provides another layer to really think through and automate these pieces. It doesn't mean you can't make ad hoc changes as you need to, but for those areas that we continue to evolve, the users and what admin rights they should have, what level of rights, the applications, being able to coordinate that really is the vision around Entra ID, and certainly lifecycle workflows, which we're going to talk mainly our focus today. And again, like I said, a lot of these start off with the HR system. Makes sense. Some people don't have a full HR system. Yes, they do payroll in another area, but it's not really automating all of those other areas that you have. So sometimes you just start directly in Azure AD. It happens. That's where it exists, and that's totally fine too. Sometimes HR system will push into Azure AD and say, hey, there's a new account, and it provides the details that we would need. What department are they in? When's their start date? And this is where the lifecycle workflows really comes into play. So inside of Microsoft Entra ID governance, there really is the three core areas. Now they overlap with all the other places with Entra because, Entra ID, formerly known as Azure Active Directory, is where people's credentials first live. It's where their security groups live. Where Microsoft 365 groups live. Microsoft Teams, SharePoint sites. All of those things are Microsoft 365, but we can start to determine, who gets access to what applications. How do they still need access to those applications? They haven't used that team in a while. Should we remove them? Should we do something else? And then there's lifecycle workflows. And really, lifecycle workflows, focusing on that part. This is where we really, the main topic for today, which is how do we automate these repetitive tasks in order to have a better experience for our employees, less frustration in meetings and documents and spreadsheets to try and organize this, and really start to even expand that out so that it can actually help update, remove, disable, delete, whatever that is on other services outside. And I'll show just a little bit of that, of how you can do this. And it's the hard part in this is not so much you'll see as we kind of go through, like, oh, that seems easy. The harder part is, how do we want to adjust this in our organization? What are all those other services? Because we get very used to log into this portal, log into that. Very busy for the IT person or manager. Like, why do we care about the IT person's busyness? Well, then they're not adding the real value that we want in the organization, which is to improve what we can do with our systems and our data. You've been on these in the past. I love all the automation things, and all the things coming with Copilot are going to be wonderful. So being able to leverage this kind of a system is really going to get us there. First off, you're going to see this in the demo. We're going to go right into the demo right after this. 3 key things to think in terms of processes. And these are the terminology that's coming out of, lifecycle workflows. Is there's joiners, people coming into the business. There's movers, people moving around, change in role, change of a department. And then there's leavers, people that are departing the organization, retirement, termination. Sometimes it's not even that abrupt. Sometimes it's people leaving because of an M&A activity and you sold out part of a business and you may want to do this in an organized fashion. So, these are the 3 things to kind of think of. And there's some really nice templates to start with, which I'll walk you through here in a moment. Now, as we go through this part of the demo, some things I want you to keep in mind is that you can easily expand the scenario of what you're working on. So it's not just, we hire a person and put them into this. So I'll walk through a couple little pieces. I'm starting out with a pretty blank slate, talk about some of these components as we go through it. But let's start off with the scenario, if you will. Let's see what a workflow looks like. And we're going to create one. So inside of here, I've logged in. Now, one thing, we'll talk about licensing, who needs to get licensing. We'll talk about that, a little bit towards the end. But let's go through the scenario of already we have these different templates, and I'll show you through some of those. Here we have one scenario where we have somebody who's a pre-hire. So they really haven't been hired on yet, but there's some things that we may want to give some information. So in this particular one, if you click details on the right, it gives you kind of a basic overview of what this is. It's a joiner. This is going to happen 7 days before the employee hire date. Now, this employee hire date, and you'll see another one, and I'll actually call this out as we come out of the demo and then back into the slide, that there's another one, which is the departing date. And that one's a little weird, and I'll talk about that. But this is saying when the hiring date happens, because a lot of times if you have an HR system, let's say, I'm not going to name anyone because I don't want to validate those, but if they push things into Azure Active Directory, great, provisioned it in there, and they can say, but this person's hire date is, in 2 weeks, right? But 7 days before, we may want this kicked off because we actually want to do something with it. And let's take a look what that looks like. So we'll go ahead and select the template. And in here, you can see some of the basics information. I could change it and say, well, I don't want it 7 days. Maybe I want it 3 days before the hire date. And, and here's the scope. So these scope and these properties that you're seeing are directly out of Entra ID, Azure Active Directory. I'll keep it both on there so we don't get ourselves too confused. And this one in this template says, well, we're going to work on the department. So if the department's marketing, then this flow would this workflow would actually execute. Oh, new hire 7 days before, and they're in the marketing team. I'm going to run this one because maybe I do something different for those in sales. Maybe I do something different, or maybe not. I just want to trash it. So there's a place where you can start to figure out what is the scope of who we would interact with, and then we can take a look at the tasks. I'm just going to leave it at marketing, keep it pretty basic here. And this one says, hey, we're going to go ahead and generate a temporary access pass, and we're actually going to email this to the manager. And so the intent is think about the person first coming on board and go, hey, when you start up, how do I give them the credentials? Oh, just email me their passwords. Well, that doesn't sound safe, because now it's just a raw credential. No, I'm going to do a temporary passcode, and I can even say how long I want that thing to live once it's activated. So now the manager has this and can submit it out, to the user, the day before, the 2 days before, whenever that they feel right. But they have this beforehand. And this is an enabled task. So how long is the duration? Is it one time? No, we'll let them do it a couple of times because they need to do this in order to log in. Now they get their credentials, they'll do their MFA registration. All that's handled by the other parts of conditional access policies and MFA registration. Not going to get into that, but now they're alive, okay? And in this, I can decide, well, this is good, and let's go ahead and review it. Yeah, that looks good. Now this year's scheduling it or not means if I don't schedule it, it's not going to run under the regular schedule, which I'll talk about later on. But I just want it as we go. For now, I'm just going to leave it like this, and I'm going to go ahead and create it. Now, once the workflow is created, it has its basic properties, but now I can do more things with it. So here's the pre-hire employee, the one we just created, and we can take a look at the tasks and decide we want to do a few more tasks. Not only do we want to do that, remember, this is going to kick off 7 days, because that's what we configured, 7 days before the hire date. So if you wanted to do something at 3 days before the hire date, well, we would create a new flow and do those actions. But maybe I want to also send a little reminder. That's going to go, email is going to go to the manager. I can do it one email or I can do 2 emails. Let's not try and blast them too much, but we can do that. And I might also say, all right, well, we're going to send a welcome email, and it's going to go to the user attribute like, hey, you should have got this from your manager. If you don't hear from him in 3 days, right? Because only the manager got the first one with temporary passcode. Please send an email to HR, right? So now we can go in here and CC the HR distribution list or specific email person, what have you. So, but remember, all of these tasks are bunched together based off of that time of when we said we wanted it to happen. Again, I didn't set the schedule for it, but that's what would happen. So we can add additional ones in there, including customizing what this email would look like. So in here there's a link to show you what it is. We're like, hi person, hey, in your first job, your manager should give you these things. If you don't hear anything, what have you. And now you've done 2 things. Where before HR, think about how a lot of people do that today. Okay, we're gonna send you this. Then we have a task list. The HR person's got to say, hey, did you do it? Oh, let me go reach out. Put all those together and thinking about your flow for this workflow that hits off that time that hits those types of employees. So as you start to think of this, well, there's some things we do for all employees, but maybe for marketing, we do something different. For sales, we actually want to send them something and go, hey, make sure to read these things so your first day goes well. We do that for all of our people in marketing. So whatever that is, you can anchor off that department, that date, and you can choose something else. Maybe it's not departmental. Maybe there's another, maybe it's the region that they're in. It can be both. It can be the email and the region. So could you have 20 different workflows? You bet. Do you have 20 different workflows today? Most likely. And there's where you're doing a lot of redundancies. Okay, so this is just a pre-hire one that we have there, the execution permissions. I'll go ahead and save this. And those last place where we talked about the when does it kick off here? So this the conditions that we have, we can adjust them as we want, change the scope, and it does the versioning. So as we make changes to our flow and our process, we can see the different versions that we've implemented. So you can see here, I made a little change so we can look at our versions of what have we done over time and checked on it. And this one hasn't run, but as we run them, we can see how they're succeeding or failing. So from a compliance standpoint, did we notify them when we needed to, and then have it run? So real quick, now you can start to see where the benefits of having this, where you can go back and look and you don't have to ask somebody or update another spreadsheet. I know I'm harping on that a lot, but it's important. The other part that's important in here is that, great, we're seeing things that are in Azure Active Directory. The person's first this is the new hire. They've come on board. The day that they get hired, there's some tasks that we run. We want to enable the user account. Up till now, their account is not enabled. Even though we may have sent them the passcode, it doesn't work till that day. Now we enable their users. We send them welcome email. Hey, here's welcome to the team. Here's a link of 15 things that are great resources. You should do 1, 2, 3. And we can send this out to the manager as well. We can, send a welcome email that we want because there's dynamic attributes. And I can even add them into specific groups. So if we know that this particular one, again, we were targeting just marketing, so I may want to have the same type of workflow and submit it for people that are going to be in our engineering team. Because when they come on, it's a little bit different because there we want to say, hey, make sure when you come on board, you're going to do this as manager. In your first 2 days, you need to look at these LinkedIn learning sessions, Microsoft learning things to get ready. It doesn't remove customized email from the manager, but consistency is what's key. And we know that they got those things. But let's say there's another type of task that we want to put on here. So I may want to put them into specific groups, and that gives them access, security groups access to certain things. I may want to even add that person into a particular Microsoft team. The removing, obviously, this would be for somebody leaving the organization or changing roles. So you can see here that they're a mover. But in this case, it's a new hire. So we want to go ahead and add them to certain groups. We want to add the user to specific teams that we've identified that for everybody in marketing really needs to be a part of these specific teams. and isn't putting them into a group the same thing. Microsoft 365 groups are a little bit different. So this gives you that capability. So now I can make sure that they're in the right security groups. They're added, the right groups as a whole, because it might be a distribution list. I could put them into, add them to the right teams. And think of this as well. The execution conditions of when they start also applies for how many days after they started, because potentially on the third day is when I add them to more teams, right? Their first day or 2 days, you might have like a new employee orientation, and I don't want to stack them with all those things in business just yet. But on their third day that they've started, I do want to add them in, knowing it's going to happen, knowing that they're going to be added. I don't have to submit to IT and go, wait, don't add them to that because I need them to do this or something else. Maybe there's some HR forms they have to fill out, but by the third day, we'll automatically put them in there for it. So bank on it, make that even part of the welcome letter, what have you. As we were talking about Entra and the access packages, this is the way that you can give specific people and groups access to certain applications and sites and data with the permissions as a package, and target it that way. So if you've already created access packages, awesome. If you haven't, you can define those access packages to give the right groups of people the access that they need, either by requesting it or directly. In this case, I can assign that to them. Maybe that happens on their first day, maybe it happens on their third day, maybe it happens on their fifth day, whatever that is. Or you can even say that there's another property that we have inside of Azure Active Directory that once that's there, we know that they've either completed their sexual harassment training, we know they completed their whatever it is because we hard stamp it in there. Maybe it comes from HR, I don't know, just ideas. And when that happens, then we give them access to the relevant customer data or contracts. And so that could be a part of a mover type of activity. Anyhow, so here we have that kind of a scenario where we are, giving them access to certain things because they're a new employee. So many of the major kind of common tasks that you would see in here, but there's often more items. So let's take a look at another scenario. So this scenario, let's go ahead and create somebody that we are offboarding an employee. So a few things. One is you see this property here, employee leave date and time. It does have to be date and time because of the way the scheduler works, and I'll show that here in just a few minutes to kind of top off the demo. But now, again, we're just going through the regular one, offboard employee, and it could be offboard employee in general. I can also have the same thing, offboard employee that's specific to engineering, so I can kind of stack those if I need to. Defining the scope, this is for marketing again, just kind of keep it the same in general. And here you can see we're disabling the account, we're removing the users from all of the groups, and we're going to remove the users from all of the teams. And in this case, we don't necessarily want to delete the user, right? Because we may have other things. They still have a mailbox, and maybe we're going to tend to that afterwards. And perhaps as an organization, we always have to discuss it or what happens. I can even automate that too. But now, again, we have all that, and I can even say, yeah, go ahead, let's run that on the schedule, or not here. I'm not. And so now we have this employee offboarding, but in this offboard for an employee, there is another service that I need to interact with. So, one that we use this product called Autotask for, billing and time management. And people can single sign on with it because we have an Azure Active Directory, it's an enterprise application. And when people first come on board, they'll get their Active Directory or Entra ID account. And when they first go to the application, it'll dynamically provision. It's very nice. But whenever we disable or even delete a user, it doesn't automatically do it. Somebody has to go into that system and log into portals. But that's crazy talk. So one of the things here in your tasks is I could say, well, let's do a little bit of automation to it. So you can create what's called run a custom task extension. Now, I'm not going to get too nerdy on this, but just so that you can see what exists. And on the website, when I was looking at it, it's not so easy to see how the two things connect. Anyhow, so here we can run a custom action. So I'm going to go ahead and add it in. You'll see that, hey, I got a little configuration to do for this. And in here, I'm just going to, I'm going to say disable auto task account. And now you'll see here a little drop down. It says auto task disable. Oh, where's this? I'll show you that here in a second. So now let's go ahead and save that, and we're all good. So now I'll click save. So I just put in this custom extension that's in there. Now, what is this custom extension? Well, We go back over here to Lifecycle Workflows. Again, here you can see we're in entra.microsoft.com. I should have covered that first. And under Identity Governance, Lifecycle Workflows, that kind of takes us to this main page where we started. And on the left, you can see custom extensions. Now I already have this one that's there, right? That I already created. But let's show what this little guy would do. So if I said I wanted to disable, I don't know, access to billing system, right? Because there's something we have to do over there. It could be single sign-on with Azure Active Directory, might not be, whatever that might be. And that's what we want to do. In this case, you know, how do you want it to do it? Launch and continue, launch and wait. We'll just say launch and continue. This it's probably not the best, but it's like, hey, if as long as we run it, we're saying it's fine. Or you can tell it to wait. I'll just do the wait here. Next to the details, now this is where you select your subscription, the resource group that you want it to go to, and then you give it a name. Now I'm not going to do this one now because it takes a few seconds and kind of breaks up my flow here. But once you do this, it will create, and you, by the way, when you do this, the person that is logged in here that has the rights for Lifecycle Workflow must also have the right to create a logic app, right? So that's a little thing. There's a role you can assign to an Azure in the Azure subscription. So whatever you type in here, no spaces, you got to just do letters, and I like dashes. Feels like a space, but it's not. But you put it in here, it will then create a logic app in the subscription in the resource group you selected, which you should have rights to, and then it will create it for you. At that point, it's like, yay, that thing is done. And at that point, really, that's all you have. Just kind of like this thing. Now, the one I already pre-created that's in here, if we look at it, this is a logic app. If you've ever seen it, here you go. If you've seen Power Automate and doing flows, looks exactly the same. Pretty much it is the same. You can actually take flows and put them logic apps. Oh, it's another topic. Anyhow, in here, what it has created by it, I mean, Entra, the lifecycle workflow, and I said make one. This is what it created for me, the name I gave it, and saying, great, we're gonna have a post, and when that post comes in, it's gonna go, here's the schema that's gonna happen, and so when it runs, this is what's gonna get called, and then there's an HTTP response post back, because remember I said, hey, I wait for me. So it's already put those pieces in for me. Now I just got to do the sandwich in the middle. And let's say for the application we're talking about, not going to go too deep on this, I actually want to create an HTTP post, because now that I have this information, I actually want to do an HTTP post, put in the URI of Autotask, whatever system you have, put in the appropriate authentication, cookies, the body text, whatever that might be. So if it likes JSON type stuff, you can put JSON type stuff in here and say, yeah, here's the, where is it? Trying to see, it is the subject user principal name. So that's what it's going to be. And let's say this thing was so simple, it was like, it's probably doing the wrong JSON, but let's just go with it. There, user is this. And let's pretend this URI says, do this. And there's a action under here, where I do, action. If this was the right one, it's not for this, but I think you'll get the idea. Disable, right? So if this was the response we were going to set, and that's it. So now when that flow runs and this gets kicked off, we get the post. It calls a logic app. The logic app gets that information, posts to the other service. Whatever the response is, we'll say, obviously you want to do other handling of stuff in here, but now you get the point. And then it posts back into Lifecycle Workflow. So being able to do these kinds of calls, whether it's a REST call, an XML call, those are things you can come to as a project. But this is how you can automatically, you're starting to see where, oh, now we can do that. And I'll have to ask the person, hey, did we make sure to take those 3 things out? Are you sure? We can still run other type of tools to go collect and make sure that's good. But on a schedule basic reoccurring, it's really, really nice. And you're seeing in here, you're not writing a lot of, heavy code or scripts, although we'll talk about that. But now it's just all working kind of this Azure framework and in Entra. Okay, so that's how this custom extension talks to Logic App. It created it for us. It put in the sandwich that we needed, things coming in, things going out. And then within the workflow that I had, the one that we created, which was the offboarding an employee, here you can see we have our tasks. And one of them is disabling the auto task account, and we'd be able to see this in our version in our history. So if something failed or something else, we can still tell it like, hey, if you fail, Like just keep going, but it still gets captured. And what happens if things have failed? Yes, you can do notifications on that too. As you can see, there's lots and lots of stuff. But anyway, now we're seeing that, oh, it's not just the Azure Active Directory Entra ID part of it and Microsoft 365, which is still really cool, but we can improve our process in other areas. So if people change teams, they change, or maybe you have a special site for managers. Oh, they're now a manager. And if I see their title, that they have a title change that has manager in it, I may want to execute. That's part of the mover activities. One thing that I said I would cover here is, if we look at, if I go to overview, you can see there's these workflow schedules. So this will run every 3 hours. So if a person starts, at 9 a.m., in terms of the tenant, because your tenant has like a set schedule time, you want to just make sure you kind of coordinate that time, because this thing's only run every 3 hours. I can have it run every hour. I can have it run every 24 hours, whatever your delight is. I don't believe there's a cost impact to that. You can also, it will come from this email, and then I select, our own custom domain. If not, it'll just do a regular generic Agile IT one when it's sending emails out. So you probably want to customize that, and then it'll use the same company banner logo when emails are going out. You should have that configured. If you're in a project with us, we've done that. If not, we can help out. So this is a place where you can say, how often does that schedule go? So if there's anything that was part of the workflows, you can see that, oh, wait a minute, this is not a part of the schedule. So obviously, you go to production, we want to change that. If not, you can still select it and then run it on demand if you want to do it. Good for testing and kind of getting it out. Sometimes for larger changes, you may want to do this. But most of the times you want to get down your process and your flow and then set it to a schedule and let the attributes and the scoping take action for you. Again, you can still see the log that's happening, that they've been doing work. If you have Azure Active Directory, we do all our customers set up the diagnostic settings for Azure Active Directory that points to Azure Monitor and doing the log analytics. You can still see there that the system has created it on a scheduled basis to create those users. So you still have an even deeper log to get into, but that's a whole nother session. Anyhow, let me kind of pull this away. Hopefully that gave you a little bit more insight to what's possible from this. From a licensing perspective, these are the commercial licensing. Today's September 20, 2023 for the recording here. This was the pricing that's there. This happens with a lot of the Microsoft pricing, where if you just do it month to month to month, it costs more than if you said, yes, I'm committed to it for the year, but I'm going to pay it monthly, so the price is different. This is currently, as of today, not available in GCC High in that instance. We double checked today, but when it does become available, obviously the prices will be different, and then the service and capability will be available there. Now, the one hard question that's been hard to answer really is like, who needs it? It seems like, is it only the person that's administering it, only the people that are getting it? Really, the guidance seems to be like really everybody, because people, it is looking, the system is checking all of your user properties, because that's the scope, at the rate in which you're changing it. By default it's 3. We say you can do it an hour every 24 hours. So it's looking to benefit everybody. So is it worth $7 a month? Is it worth $4 a month, depending on how many users you have? Think about the more people you have, but yeah, it's going to cost more money. But how much burden does IT, HR, all of the managers have when they're doing this? I bet you it's more than $400 a month across the organization. So that's why I say, that the people cost is real. If you were to really add up what people really cost you in an organization, if you're not in a consulting business, you may not know that every hour, but you pretty understand it. So I think it is worth it for all the people if you're really using it. I mean, of course, that's a given. I guess if you don't use it with any product, but that's there. The one that's interesting is the one that's called the step up. So Entra ID Governance is not a part of any of the suites. I have Microsoft 365 E5. Do I have it? No, you don't. What you do have is inside of Microsoft 365 E5 is you do have Entra ID P2, which means if you have that, you can pay the step up license, which if you do it, you commit it for the year, it's $4 a month instead of $7 a month. Well, what if I have Entra ID P1 and EMS E3 and Exchange Online? Yes, there's lots of things, but this, the pretty much thing is if you have it, Entra ID P2, then you can step up and buy that license instead of the other one. There are promos that are going on in the commercial world. on some trials that are there, so you can talk to us about that if we do your licensing. But then it kicks in after I think like a month. I think it starts off like 25 in part of the promo, even though you want 5, but it'll give you that, and then it'll downgrade. So anyway, so that's a little bit about the licensing. People normally have a lot of questions. So here's one little note that I give you that's really, really important. So one is we talked about, especially people leaving the organization, the employee leave date time is not in the portal. You can't see it there. I mean, that kind of makes sense. A lot of people go into the portal and see things, and maybe that's not one that you really want to advertise that's in there. So you can make a call. You know, there's a REST call, there's a PowerShell command. You go to this link here. You know, we'll make the link live when we push the recording out. Take a screenshot, type it in. But anyhow, or just look up the Azure AD employee leave date time. You can run the PowerShell command to do it. You can use the graph. I love using the Graph Explorer, really easy way to post it. Anyway, you'll have to submit that in order to put that date in for that user. So that part's a little bit of pain. Yes, you can, you know, there's lots of entryways into working with, you know, the Entra ID Governance. There's the portal, as you saw, we can do it. You can actually create a few, export them out, and export the template out, configure it because maybe you're going to do 30 or 40 and you don't want to click your way through it, through that kind of thing, or maybe you do. Anyway, there's more to do it. I love all the automation stuff. And yes, code. So here you can see one of the examples that Microsoft's been doing really, really good about this in the graph. Is providing different examples in here. You can see the HTTP posts. So if we wanted to tell the governance, I'm sorry, the workflow, the lifecycle workflow capability to go do something or enter in something new, you can also do that through an HTTP post. If you have a built-in application and you're already doing REST-based calls, go nuts. C#, CLI, so lots of different ways to get it in there and figure it out. So I just thought that'd be an important thing to note. Like, where is that attribute? It's there, you just can't see it in the portal. Okay. So really wrapping this up, hopefully you get your questions ready to go. It really is, you know, automating these things will reduce a lot of your manual activities, and it will help coordinate across the teams you already have today, but do it in a way where you can actually see it. You can actually get a report off of it. And for me, I always like those because, you know, I feel like I'm wasting people's time when we were everybody sending emails. Hey, this person's starting on Monday. Do we have this? Do we have this? Did we do this? Does somebody do this? Where's that? Even though we have a list, sometimes that list isn't updated. So I think this really starts that process all. And, you know, and think about the process you have, and don't try to essentially recreate your manual process, because a lot of times your manual process is because it's manual and we have to ask all of these people. So now start to think, well, if we know that this is going out, maybe the compliance team or HR team says, look, at least for the first 15 hires, when we do those tasks, have it also send me an email just so I know that it worked. Although I could check the other system, fine, bake it in there, but get ready to move it. And start with your most common elements that you have when people come in, because part of people coming on board, when they get access to things, is not just turn on the account. A lot of times, like we do this at Agile IT, we do it for our customers, is we use security groups to do the licensing assignments. So if that's the way their licensing assignment is being done, so adding into that group, license taken care of. Now they're able to log in with that one-time, you know, the one-time passcode. Now they have access. They get all their MFA that's in there. They get another email for something. So really start there, and then start to expand to the other departments, because remember the movers, people that are changing roles, people that, and sometimes that role change might be a part of a bigger organizational change where we may want to change access or permissions. We can line all of those things up, so when we make an announcement, it isn't, all right, IT team, you know, get your fingers ready, it's Clickify time, and maybe some PowerShell scripts, and it's a hodgepodge. So, you know, thinking about those large organization changes could be very, very helpful. And then this line at the end, I seem to use this all the time, but I can't help it. Test, document, automate, all the things you want, and set up the alerts, because you can set up alerts. I really talked about that, but that's kind of a generic thing inside of Azure to set up alerting when these activities are happening, just in case there's something weird happening or something you don't know. But hopefully this gave you an overview of what this product and Entra ID governance is possible. You know, a lot of what you're going to do is going to be, hey, we need to get together and understand, what do we want those processes to be when people are coming in as a whole, as a department, when they change roles, when they leave roles, what are all the systems, and then allow its process to document and track, be there for you instead of doing all these things manual.